So first, we're going to go to this story here out of Globo.com. Now, this is the mainstream media in Brazil. I believe that Globo is actually the largest media outlet in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. And they say that Brazil reports a 25% drop in killings in the first 2 months of the year. Now, when you read through this article, we're going to go through this really quickly. They don't really openly state or acknowledge that it's because of Jair Bolsonaro's tough stance on crime, that this is why this is happening. I think we can safely assume, of course it is. Of course it's his tough stance on crime. Of course it's the quotes that he said that he's going to put criminals in graves and things like that. Of course, openly in public, we have been seeing videos upon videos upon videos come out, especially on WhatsApp, you see this, where the military is essentially shooting gang members and criminals. They have gotten entirely sick of it. This is why the civilian population in Brazil went from multiple regimes, left-wing regime after left-wing regime after left-wing regime, openly, explicitly, and overtly and admittedly communist regimes, to Jair Bolsonaro, because they were sick of what was going on. They were sick of the admitted communist regimes helping and coordinating and colluding, being corrupt with the gang members and the gangs in Brazil and helping them make money, and crime was on the rise. They were entirely sick of that, and this is the reason why this democracy, as you would call it, was partly what the left wing wants for America, where you have, mandatory voting. They went from extreme left to pretty much extreme right because the left wing was not helping. And as a matter of fact, Jair Bolsonaro recently made it easier, took the first step. It's not what we want, but the first step in the right direction, made it easier for law-abiding citizens to obtain firearms a few months ago. And I think that this is a big contributing factor as well. If you notice, just in the past couple of months, I've had many different debates on this channel where we talked about guns and gun crime. More recently, I think Dr. John Lott, an economist, who explained to a 30-year-old left-wing game streamer that most of the crime guns in this country are obtained or possessed illegally. Most of the shootings are by gang members. And the countries that have more gang activity than we do here have more gun crime than we do here. Brazil is a big example where it's pretty much still illegal to be able to obtain a firearm for a citizen, but yet they have much more gun crime than we do here, much more gun homicides than we do here. So does Mexico, so does Honduras, so does El Salvador, so does Venezuela, so does Ecuador, so does many countries throughout the world who have sometimes 6 or 10 times more gun crime and gun homicides than we do here, and yet we have 60 times more gun ownership and guns than they do in those countries. And when that was explained, it seems like he was completely accepting of the fact that more guns equal less crime, and most of the shootings that happen are caused by gang members with illegally obtained firearms. And this, I think, is another contributing factor to the 25% drop in killings in the first 2 months of the year, and the trend is just continuing. And of course, I think more particularly it's the tough stance on crime. You go to this New York Times article, Will dig graves, Brazil's new leader vows to kill criminals, and the civilians cheer this on. They weren't before. They were kind of like the left wing here, where they were like, oh, let's have prison reform, and let's legalize fentanyl, and let's legalize heroin, and let's just have this open liberal utopia where everything's going to be okay because the criminals are just nice people like the rest of all of us, right? They were more like that. But now they're like, okay, we're sick of that. Obviously, that's not working. Obviously, having guns be illegal for law-abiding citizens is not working. We want to go this direction. And you have this article here, Bolsonaro and the fascism of tough on crime. Seems like it's working. Seems like we have a stark contrast between the communist regimes of the past and Brazil's Bolsonaro regime today. The country had 6,856 violent deaths in January and February. Only Paraná does not report the data. In the same time period of 2018, there were 9,094 murders. Fall is pulled mainly by the Northeast. Ceará had 58% fewer victims. National Homicide Index created by the G1 company's violent crimes month to month. This is the first part of the year, they say. It goes on. Brazil had a 25% drop in the number of murders in the first 2 months of this year compared to the same period last year. This is shown by the National Homicide Index created by the G1 based on official data from the 26 states and federal district. This is the first partial released in the year. It says, first partial report, according to the tool, there were 6,800 violent deaths in the first 2 months of 2019. The data does not include Paraná. The state government informs that the numbers of January and February are still being tabulated for further disclosure. Apart from Paraná, there were 9,000 murders in the same period of 2018. That is a drop of 25%. If we can get a 25% decrease in murders here in America, that would be phenomenal. Another thing that came up in the debate as well is the fact that we have the same amount of gangs here in this country that we did in 1996. And so these gangs that have been established for, a very long time in this country are still going on and active in this country. Not only that, but something that I don't think I articulated properly enough is that we went from 800,000 gang members somewhere in the 1990s to 2006 to today, where the FBI states that we have 1.4 million gang members in this country. So the per capita gang members to people is actually increased per 100,000 in this country. So nothing's being done about gangs. Another thing that was brought up is that the left wing here is talking about erasing gangs databases because it contains Latinx people, and I guess one of their biggest excuses is that it's non-functional. There were a couple of errors here and there, but for the most part, it seems like it was very functional. Now, I think that John Lott, who describes himself as a libertarian, agrees, and I guess they have the assumption is that if we end the war on drugs and we legalize all drugs in this country, or at least decriminalize the drugs, that would actually cause the gangs to disperse. But I don't particularly buy that. I think number one, the reason being is because you look at the cartels in Mexico. Most of the money that they're making now is based on human trafficking, according to the Border Patrol. I mean, they're making somewhere around like $10,000 to $30,000 a head human trafficking into the United States. Number two, the gangs might just find some other thing to do, whether it be illegal arms deals or something like that. And then the third thing is that I have 13 years experience working with drug addicts and alcoholics. And the biggest thing that I hear all the time is drug addicts, alcoholics, they go into recovery or decide to make a change when they hit rock bottom. It's not when they're being, catered to, or they're being helped do their drugs like they do in San Francisco, where they provide you with free syringes and this, that, and the other. No, it's when they hit rock bottom, when they get arrested, when they lose their job, when they lose their car, when they lose their family. You're not going to do that by helping these people or legalizing it or giving to them for free to help them, with their drugs, or legalizing fentanyl. Those things, of course, based on my 13 years of experience of helping people like this, I just don't think that those things are going to be effective. I think the libertarian, left-wing view of just a grand utopia after we decriminalize all the drugs in this country is ridiculous. I think that we need to go tough on these gangs. We need to break apart these gangs, and we need them to go hard in the gangs. But of course, the left wing won't let us do that. They're going to say that it's inhumane and fascist, and have all their organizations, go after and dox police officers going into these neighborhoods where most of the shootings occur by gang members in the most diverse areas of our country with illegally obtained and possessed weapons. And so, seems like it's functioning in Brazil. A hardline approach to crime is functioning in Brazil. Law and order, logos, is really the key. It says the survey reveals that there were a reduction of 2,238 victims, and the four states had a reduction of more than 30%. Ceará had the biggest drop in the country at 58%. Only two states, Amazonas and Rondônia, had an increase in the number of violent deaths. And when you look at the demographics, of course, of those particular places in Brazil, it's the most. It's the most, I guess you can call, diverse in Brazil. Most of the south of Brazil is very safe, very European, I guess you can say. Lots of Germans, lots of Portuguese, lots of Italians. They actually said that they were going to separate from Brazil at one point in time, or maybe are still advocating for that, to become their own country, because they're like number one in healthcare. I could be off on that number, but I think they're in the top 5 for sure. They're number one in safety. It's basically Europe, essentially, in the south of Brazil. It's mostly Europeans there. Taking this data into account, the decrease in the quarter continues to be 25% in Brazil. Samira Bueno and Renato Sergio de Lima of the Brazilian Forum of Public Security say that the country faces a good enigma. It is necessary to identify with precision what caused this inflection so that public policies can be more effective, and this will only be possible with the continuous investment in monitoring and evaluating programs and actions. And so it's your idea, your strategy should be going after the gangs, going after the people that are causing the violence with the guns. Of course, the left wing, that logic doesn't register in their head for some reason. They think it's the gun, that we need to restrict access to firearms, which would only restrict access to law-abiding citizens. Jair Bolsonaro understands this. I mean, you look to London, for instance, they're back on the upward trend of murders. They went down, they went up, they went above New York City, which has a comparable population. They went below New York City again, and now they're looking at the upward trend again. And what are they doing? It's mostly knife crime with gang members in the most diverse areas of London. Black teens stabbing other black teens with knives. I mean, they have this hashtag knife crime and knife crime. They're launching all these hashtags. They're having all these knife turn-in bins. The London mayor says put metal detectors in all the schools. He says that we have to ban tip knives in London. Of course, they're going after the tool. Their logic is not registering. They're not going after the gangs. They're doing the same thing that Chicago did, dismantling the gangs database, the Met Police's gangs database in London. The logic is not there with the left wing. It's just not there. The logic is not there. The logos is not there. The order is not there. It's just chaos on the left wing. The right wing, you have order. Now, sometimes it can get out of hand, of course, with both scenarios, but you just have to think of it like this. Order. Law and order. Law and order. Jair Bolsonaro, I think, has done this quite well in Brazil so far. We'll have to see what happens into the future. Videos are posted every single day here about breaking news topics, so make sure you hit the bell button if you haven't already so that you are notified. Check the description for links to Patreon and PayPal, and of course follow me on Gab, Minds, BitChute, and Instagram. Links in the description as well. And of course these videos only go so far, so be sure to share with family and friends.